Yeah, so it is a valid strategy. So you have a couple of SDKs. You have particle code. Actually, I think particle code is required. Then you have Appcelerator. Is Unity 3D cross-platform?
Well, yeah, they recently added compilation to Flash, so
right.
Like
so yeah, I mean, you have those three: particle code, Unity, and an Appcelerator. Titanium. And I believe there are. I'm trying to think if there's any others. Yeah, I'm not really sure. But they are, yeah, they're very valid strategies, absolutely. And they're even more valid strategies to benchmark success, right? To benchmark if something's going to be successful, or prototype if something's going to be successful. So if you have some sort of assertion, right, you can create a game rather quickly. That's not the full-fledged version of the game, but actually get over some of the main hurdles that a game has. So for example, you might spend a year building a game and think it's going to do really well. And you could release that game and no one uses it, right? So you spent a couple $1 million building something which no one ever used, which is horrible, right? When you could have mitigated all that risk by just sort of upfront testing a few key variables, just to see if they would have even made it past the first steps. It might be some sort of, I don't know, Vietnamese army game, and you're the Vietnamese army versus the Japanese army, and it's, I don't know, something like that, right? But for some reason, people just don't even like the fact that they're like, oh, I don't care about the Vietnamese army, and I don't know. For some strange reason, who knows, it just doesn't, people don't even sign up. You could have mitigated that whole risk, where you could have just tested it and see how many people signed up, and say, okay, well, now we're going to create this, right? Whereas, I mean, if you did that with, like 100 different concepts, there are absolutely some where you'll see some sort of growth just by having the concept out there, and some literally no one will sign up. So it's really an easy way to test the market and understand what people are thinking to some degree. And I think at a more practical level, if you guys are thinking about developing a game or a Formula One game or something like that, that's a evolution, maybe the next version of your product or whatever it may be. You can test out either title names or different sorts of themes, all that sort of stuff to say, okay, well, what do people resonate with most? Maybe it's Formula One Ferrari edition, or Formula One Porsche edition, or maybe it's the Honda edition. You're like, Honda, like, who the fuck would care about that, right? But you market it to a subset of your users, and you notice, oh, well, the Honda edition works, really well. Well, does this have to do with something with, maybe Honda has a more pervasive brand, and people like it, or maybe our demographic isn't what we thought it was. Maybe they actually feel like they can, have a Honda. I don't know, and it's kind of a far out example, but I think you get where I'm going with it. And actually, it's not that far out, because there are some very strange things that we've run into where they work really well, completely unexpectedly. But yeah, I mean, just testing things up front, just a little bit, which very little effort is required. It's just some kind of solid strategy. That's really powerful, and it can de-risk your company and de-risk your product. Some of those, they don't rely so much on. They're more about the game and the. So I guess there's sort of two. I'm wondering if there's two questions here. Are you talking about purely metrics or also testing?
Well, code and testing are surely a must, that I understand.
Right.
Statistics are more interesting, as I've discovered this too, only a bit recently, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
To the extent that you've been explaining.
Yeah.
It seems like nobody has used it in full-size games.
Yeah, that's accurate. That's accurate. And so I actually worked at a company called Outspark, which was, we took Korean games and we made them local to the American market, and they were actually bigger games. And analytics we focused much less on analytics there. But if you want to look at how we acquired users, they were through much more traditional routes. And they weren't really social games, right? So in social games, analytics are much, much more important, because you're acquiring your users outside of them spending $70 to go to the store and purchase the game, right? It's much less traditional. It's sort of this new age, this new cutting edge concept.
Yeah, micro-transitions and stuff.
Right. So I don't know how big game companies and big game studios are doing it for larger projects like GTA 4 stuff like this. I don't even know if they have them. And if they do, I would imagine they're pretty dumbed down. But I mean, if you guys are going in that direction, I would definitely do it. I would say you'd have a very big strategic advantage for sure if you could do something like that. So right now I run a company which is more in the business-to-business space, but still a lot of principles around marketing apply. Where what we do is we have created a global network of very high caliber engineers that we contract to companies all over the world. And so we essentially, I don't know if you know what Odesk or Elance or Freelancer.com are, but basically we've created a much higher caliber version of that, where we have a large pool of really great engineers who we keep tabs on what their skill sets are in a very meaningful way. We keep track of their scheduling in a very meaningful way, so that when companies come to us, we can, in a sort of on-demand style, contract out engineers from anywhere in the world to companies. But the way that we get clients, which I think ties into this conversation really well, is through online advertising routes, from PPC to traditional online advertising to just creating actually networks, referral networks, which these networks actually have coefficients that are relative to them, that correlate to them. They're not like viral coefficients, they're not going to be huge, but you can actually measure the effectiveness of the network, just like you can measure the effectiveness of your virality. So we can actually measure, we have a trickle-down graph, right, where we can see, okay, if the lifetime value of a customer is $25,000, and the average customer refers 0.2 customers, we can model out, just based off of the referrals, how big our company will be, just based off of that small amount of data. And then see off of if we create a separate referral network, right, that doesn't even have to do with our clients, we can actually see how many people are referring clients in that larger referral network, which the volume will clearly be substantially higher, in the hundreds of thousands, I'm sure, millions even. And you can see, you can model off of that. So you just have to understand what's going on within your network, what the value of everything is, truly, and where it's going. Well, the goals of our company is really to build the largest network of engineering talent in the world that we can contract out to companies, really, and create the most robust and elastic workforce of high caliber engineers in the way that McKinsey is for management talent. So if you look at McKinsey, they've created an extraordinarily valuable management consulting company that is world renowned as the best management consulting company in the world, that has a global presence, which some companies can even only rely on them because they're the only people in the world who have some of the resources, simply because of how talented they are and how global they are. And we want to do the same thing with software engineers, where people right now who use us because we are sort of the only option. If somebody, let's say a German company, for example, that we've worked with, wants to expand in two different countries, well, we can recruit in both of those different countries, even if they're 10,000 miles away from each other, and create engineering teams very quickly. Even if it's just the seed of their engineering companies, the first 2 or 3 people, we can very quickly disperse engineers around there. So,
and they work remotely.
They work remotely. They also work on site. So we have about 7 to 8% of our engagements are on site, but yeah, the rest 92, 93%. What we do is we have a sort of multi-stage screening process with multiple engineers and multiple different departments that we have So we have, for example, English screening. So everyone has to read, write, and speak fluent English. We have, a sort of multi-stage technical process that we have to go through, that an engineer has to go through. So not only do they have to interview with multiple engineers, as well as take an algorithms test to understand what their algorithmic knowledge is, but they'll also have to end up creating a small project. And we see what the results of that project are. Now, we actually create that project with you, and it's only about a 1 or 2 day project, but it tells us a lot about how you write code, how you follow through on your word. If you say you're going to do something, some people just disappear and come back 2 weeks later, and they're like, oh, I went on vacation. Like, okay, well, you're not working with us, because you behave the same way if you were to work with a client. And so, yeah. I was working on another company, and we basically, people kept coming to me and asking me if I could write software for them. And obviously, I just said, no, I'm working on another company. No thanks. And it happened a lot. Because I had a pretty good reputation of being a good software engineer in Silicon Valley, especially after Slide got acquired by Google, and I was the lead data architect of it. It affected my reputation. So a lot of people came to me and they said, can you write software? I kept rejecting them and just saying no. Finally, I ended up contracting out one of our engineers who was really, really good, who was part of our internal team, to make some just cash, like development cash on the side. And it ended up going extremely well, and I ended up not doing a lot of work. And so I sort of went back to everyone who said no, and I said, hey, well, I'll just find some other guys who can do this and keep contracting them out. So I did it again and again and again. We got up to a dozen, 2 dozen. It eventually became a company, and now, yeah, it's kind of where we're at. We took venture capital and all that sort of stuff. So.